Yarrow, rosehip, cattail. Three plants that Cherokee communities, the Choctaw, and the Haudenosaunee used every single day, not as curiosities, but as practical everyday answers. There is a database by ethnobotanist Daniel Moorman with over 44,000 individual plant use entries from Native American communities across North America. 44,000. And here's what stopped me cold. Several of these plants are in your grocery store right now. Some are growing in your backyard. So why did mainstream medicine spend decades calling this primitive folklore while quietly studying the exact same compounds? That question is what this is actually about. Not a history lesson, not a plant encyclopedia. This is about a system of daily practical knowledge. 15 plants, 15 solutions. That was in use for generations, documented by outside researchers, sourced by American pharmaceutical companies, and then quietly pushed to the margins while the same knowledge was repackaged and sold back at a premium. Stay with me. The first time I understood the scale of what was lost, I was holding a photocopied page from a mid-century Appalachian herbal guide. The page was worn, the type was old, and there, under yarrow, Achillea millefolium, was a description so specific it did not read like folklore at all. It read like field notes. Cherokee communities along the southern Appalachians had used yarrow as a wound herb, pressed directly into a cut to slow bleeding. The term for what yarrow does is styptic. It constricts blood vessels. Cherokee healers were not guessing. They had watched it work, generation after generation, and passed that observation forward. Civil War field medics used yarrow for exactly the same reason. Charles Millspaugh documented it in his 1892 work, American Medicinal Plants. That book is not obscure. It is real. It is archived. And yarrow is in it. Cattail is in it too. Here is a plant so common most people walk right past it. Grows near almost every pond and wetland in North America. But every part of it had a use. The pollen served as a wound dressing for burns. The leaves, the stalks, the roots, all of it applied. Not one corner of that plant went to waste. This is what daily plant knowledge actually looks like. Not mysticism, utility, accumulated, tested, and refined over time. Now open the cabinet wider. Rosehip, dense with vitamin C. During World War II, Britain could not get citrus. The government organized a national rosehip harvesting program. Children collected them, schools participated. Rosehip syrup was distributed to keep the population from developing deficiency-related illness. That is not folklore. That is wartime public health policy. And indigenous communities across North America already knew what rosehip offered. The knowledge was older than the war by centuries. Rosemary, valerian, hops. These are not exotic imports. They are names you recognize. And each one carries a documented record that most people have never been shown. Rosemary was used in preservation and respiratory steam traditions. Its antimicrobial properties are not a modern discovery. Valerian for sleep and nerve calming appears in Cherokee oral practice records and in European pharmacopoeias from the same era. Two completely separate traditions arriving at the same plant. Hops carries sedative compounds in the same family of logic as valerian. 19th century farm journals documented the hop pillow remedy. Farmers sleeping on dried hops to ease restlessness. The Lloyd Brothers Pharmaceutical Archive in Cincinnati, one of the most significant early American botanical medicine collections in existence, tracked and tested compounds like these in the early 1900s. This was not fringe behavior. This was standard American pharmacy practice. Red clover, a blood-cleansing reputation that stretched across indigenous and Appalachian traditions alike. Researchers revisited its isoflavone content in the 1990s. The compounds were there, they had been there the whole time. This is where it changes. By the early 1900s, American pharmaceutical companies were not dismissing Cherokee plant knowledge. They were sourcing it. Companies like Parke-Davis, one of the oldest pharmaceutical manufacturers in American history, referenced indigenous plant sources in their own catalogs. Sumac, used for mouth and throat care for its astringent and antimicrobial properties, appears in their records. Aloe, long applied to burns and skin injuries in Cherokee and other indigenous communities, was cataloged and studied. Blackberry root bark, loaded with tannins, traditionally used for gut settling, was a known quantity to early American botanical pharmacists. These were not fringe discoveries. They were being actively documented and commercially extracted. And then something shifted. Sumac is still on the shelf today. It is sold as a spice sprinkled into za'atar blends. The remedy use? Gone from the label. Aloe is in every drugstore in the country, repackaged, rebranded, with no reference to where that knowledge came from. Blackberry grows in backyards across the continent. Most people walk past it without a second thought. Here is the question this leaves hanging. If American pharmaceutical companies were actively sourcing and cataloging Cherokee plant knowledge in 1910, if this was serious enough to fund, to document, to profit from, then why did that same knowledge get labeled primitive superstition by 1950? That answer starts with a single report. It was published in 1910, and it changes everything that came after. The report was called the Flexner Report. It was published in 1910 by Abraham Flexner, commissioned by the Carnegie Foundation, and backed by the emerging medical establishment. It restructured American medical education from the ground up. It standardized curriculum. It standardized licensing. It standardized what counted as legitimate medicine and what did not. And plant-based practice, indigenous-linked, community-rooted, household-level herbal knowledge did not make the cut. Not because it failed, because it did not fit the new institutional model. Schools that taught botanical medicine lost accreditation. Practitioners lost licensing pathways. The AMA spent the following decades tightening those restrictions further. By the 1940s, the legal and institutional framework for dismissing traditional plant knowledge was fully in place. Not forgotten by accident, replaced by design. This is where lavender and mint enter the story, and the way they entered is the tell. Lavender had a documented history in nerve calming, sleep support, and tension relief that crossed multiple traditions. Researchers were tracking its active compounds. And then somewhere along the way, lavender became a spa product, a candle scent, a lotion ingredient sold in airport gift shops. The research thread on its compounds did not disappear. It just got buried under so much commercial noise that almost nobody followed it back to the source. Mint followed the same path. Digestive support, antimicrobial properties, respiratory use, all documented, all real, all quietly reduced to a gum flavor and a toothpaste trademark. The plant did not change. The permission to talk about what it actually did, that changed. Here is the part nobody tells you. In 1971, during the Nixon administration, the FDA began a formal review process for over-the-counter remedies. The goal, officially, was consumer safety. What it produced, practically, was a reclassification system that shifted dozens of traditional plant-based remedies out of the household medicine category and into the legal gray zone of unproven supplements. The 1962 Kefauver-Harris Amendment had already tightened the evidence requirements for medical claims. By the early 1970s, what a plant could legally be said to do, on a label, in a pharmacy, in public, had been dramatically narrowed. Household knowledge that had existed for generations was now legally unspeakable in a commercial context without a clinical trial to back it. This is why that number matters, not because of safety, because of market structure. And here is where the plants that most people have never heard of come in. Hummingbird blossom, also called buckbrush. Ceanothus americanus. Cherokee use for lymphatic and kidney support appears in ethnobotanical records repeatedly. Not in pharmacy aisles, not in mainstream wellness conversations, in field notes, in archived plant surveys, in the kind of documentation that sits in university libraries and rarely makes it into popular circulation. Black gum, Nyssa sylvatica, bark and twigs used in Cherokee practice for mouth health and gum pain. Dental ethnobotany literature acknowledges it. It never made it to a pharmacy shelf. Goldenrod, dismissed across North America as a weed that causes allergies, despite the fact that goldenrod does not produce airborne pollen in the way that ragweed does. The European Medicines Agency still maintains an active monograph on goldenrod today. Active, right now. European herbalists never stopped classifying it as medicinally significant. American culture decided it was a nuisance plant and left it at the roadside. The plant did not change. The permission to talk about it did. That reframe matters because it shifts what you are looking at. This was not about the plants failing, not about the knowledge being wrong. It was about which systems benefited when that knowledge stayed marginal, stayed mocked, stayed packaged into supplements with no instructions and no story behind them. The remedy aisle at a chain pharmacy is not neutral ground. It is the commercial version of something that once lived in backyards and kitchen shelves and community memory, sold back to you stripped of context, stripped of origin, stripped of the names of the people who developed it. Now here is what this actually means for you. Rosehip tea is at your grocery store. Rosemary is on your spice rack right now. Mint grows wild in most temperate zones in North America. It spreads on its own, needs almost nothing. Cattail is within walking distance of nearly any pond or wetland on the continent. Sumac is in the spice aisle, labeled for cooking. The plant behind it is the same one that shows up in indigenous and Appalachian remedy records. Blackberry grows in backyards and along fence lines across the country. You are not starting from zero. You are reconnecting to something that was always around you, that your great-grandparents would have recognized, that got quietly reclassified and repackaged before you were old enough to ask about it. 15 plants, 44,000 documented uses. One pharmaceutical trail that sourced the knowledge, one institutional report that restructured the framework, one regulatory reclassification that finished the job. They studied it. They used it. Then they sold it back to you without the instructions. You are not the type of person who accepts the sanitized version. That is why you are still watching. So tell me, which plant on this list surprised you most? Drop it in the comments. Save this video. Write down 3 plants from this list that are already within reach of your kitchen or your backyard. Because there is one more plant not on this list, used specifically by Cherokee healers for one of the most common modern complaints that nearly entered a clinical trial in 1987 and then quietly disappeared from the public record. That one is next.